Please go to elithecomputerguy.com in order to view schematics, code, and more for the projects that you are learning about. Welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to install Ubuntu Desktop into VirtualBox. So previously, I showed you how to install Ubuntu Server into VirtualBox, but one of the issues that you may run into when you install Ubuntu Server is that at the end of it, you simply get a blinking cursor. I think it's kind of funny. Somebody left a comment on the last video that said they did exactly what I did. They typed in pingcnn.com, and then their problem was they literally did not know how to escape out of pingcnn.com. And so that's one of the big problems you get into with the server version of Ubuntu, or basically the command line version of any of the Linux distributions, is all you get is the command line. If you know the commands, if you know the arguments, if you know the file and folder structure, it's really easy. If you don't know those things, it's almost impossible. Literally to the point that if you start pinging a website and don't know how to escape out of pinging a website, you're basically going to have to reboot your machine. So that makes people a little concerned. It's not really fun. It's kind of hard to figure out how to learn. So one of the nice things is if you use Ubuntu, the desktop version, is you get a full graphical user interface. So you get a full modern graphical user interface that more or less works like Windows or Mac OS does. So if you go and you use the server edition, you get the command line, there's no way, you're not going to feel your way through the command line. It's not like with the command line, you're going like, I don't have Google, I don't really know what I'm doing, but give me a week and I'll figure it out. That's not really how the command line works. You either know the commands or you don't. When you get a nice modern graphical user interface, you can go in, you can right click, you can left click, you can double click, you can click on settings, you can pull, drop down boxes, and basically you can work your way through and go, oh, okay, now I understand how this works. So the desktop version of Ubuntu is a very nice and easy way to kind of ease yourself into the Linux world, and then once you get used to that environment, you can say, oh, okay, I feel comfortable on Linux, now let me get into the command line. Because again, one of the important things to understand in the Linux world is the difference between a server operating system and a desktop operating system is simply that the desktop environment is installed. This is important to understand. In the Windows world, the server operating system and the desktop operating system are actually different things, right? You can't install Active Directory services straight onto a client operating system, and you probably shouldn't play video games on the server operating system. They are actually two different things. The important thing to understand in the Linux world is it's not. You have the base installation of Ubuntu or whatever distribution of Linux that you're using, and then you simply install a desktop environment on top of that, and then you interact with the desktop environment. You can swap desktop environments out. You can literally even, really, if you want to, you could install the server version of the operating system. You could install a desktop environment on top of that installation. You could do all the configurations. You could do everything that you want. And then you could literally remove the desktop environment and just have the command line left, and the server will keep doing whatever the hell it is that you set it up to do. So it's very important to understand in the Linux world that everything is just additional components. You have the kernel, and then you put the file system, and you add this, and you add this, and you add all these things up, and that's what gives you the finished product. But the nice part is then you can also start peeling things off, and you still have a server as long as you have enough stuff still installed. So what I'm going to show you how to do today is I'm going to show you how to install the Ubuntu desktop into a virtual machine, into an instance within VirtualBox. So you can sit there, you can play around with it, you can mess around, you can see how it works, you can get comfortable in that graphical user interface environment so that you're going to feel more comfortable with dealing with the command line. So with that, let's go over to the computer and I'll show you how this works. So here we are at my computer. I will remind you, I am using a MacBook Pro for my demonstration system, but since we're using VirtualBox, everything that I'm doing here should work the same whether your system is Windows or Mac or Linux. So I've just have Google Chrome opened up here, and we are at Ubuntu.com. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to go over to download, and what we're going to be looking for is Ubuntu Desktop here, and we're going to go for the long long-term support, the LTS version. So when you're watching this video, this may be 2 or 3 years after I've recorded this, so it might be 19 or 30 or whatever else. What you're looking for is the long-term support. So there's a higher number here. Basically what this is this is kind of the beta version. So they create this version, they beta test it, they see what the bugs are, and then that'll get moved over to the long-term support. So for you, especially while you are learning, stick with the long-term support. Right now that's 18.04. One of the things that we're gonna have to remember though is to look to see what the system requirements for the Ubuntu desktop are before we try to install them into VirtualBox. Because again, one of the problems with VirtualBox is all the default settings that they configured for VirtualBox were set literally a decade ago, right? So a decade ago, when the default was a gig of RAM and 10 gigs of storage and all that, that was a lot, right? When they set those defaults, that was a lot 10 years ago. Now, if you will leave the default settings in VirtualBox to a gig of RAM and 10 gigs of storage, you may run into problems. So whenever you're going to be using VirtualBox, installing an operating system onto it, you need to go and see what the requirements are. So with this, again, for some reason, they don't make it really easy. Like I would think there would just be like a link here. There should just be a link that says system requirements. But then that wouldn't be Linux, now would it? You have to go down here, and what you do is you go installation guides for Ubuntu Desktop. You click on that. Then once you click on that, you go over to the left-hand side and you look at the requirements. But of course, this is the Linux world. Why would they give you all the requirements? What? You're looking for the requirements? You click on the link that says requirements? Do you think that they're gonna give you everything? Of course not. You know, connect your laptop to a power source, ensure you have 25 gigs of free storage space, 5 gig minimum, DVD, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to deal with that because we're dealing with an ISO file. But you'll notice here, they don't tell you about RAM and they don't tell you about CPU. So then you go down here, see installation system requirements for more specific details. So you click on that. Then you go and we can actually see what the requirements are. And again, this is important because if you leave the defaults in VirtualBox, it'll turn into a mess for you. So you need a 2 gigahertz dual core processor. So you should have that. Again, I'm on a 2013 MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of RAM. So this is good. Any kind of modern system should work for you. And then the important thing here is that 2 gigs of RAM. So Ubuntu Desktop really does need a lot of RAM. So Ubuntu Server, Standard Edition needs 512. The minimal is like 380. It's 512 meg. Their minimum installation is like 380 meg. But it is important to understand with Ubuntu Desktop Edition, because you've got that full-fledged GUI interface, that desktop environment, you actually are going to need 2 gigs of RAM to make this thing work. So just keep that in mind. 25 gigs of hard drive space. Again, that's important because the default in VirtualBox is 10, and then VGA compatible, blah, 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 screen resolution. Everything else is should be fine for you. So with that, we're going to go and we're going to actually go and take a look at VirtualBox. So here we go. We have VirtualBox. I already have it open. We can see instances of operating systems that I've already created. So I have an Ubuntu server. I've been using this for testing. I have the Ubuntu install demo that I created before. And so now we're going to create an instance, a virtual machine for the desktop version. So what we do is we go over here, we click the blue new. Then I'm going to do Ubuntu Desktop install demo. So do remember with this name, this is just a user-friendly name. This is the name that'll show up over on the left-hand side. This is not the frickin' host name. Host name is something we will deal with later. Then we're gonna go and we're gonna say what type. So it is a Linux. We're gonna say what version. It's going to be Ubuntu 64. We're gonna say where the machine folder, where this is gonna get dumped. We will just leave that at default and then we will click continue. Then this is where we get to RAM size, memory size. Look at that default, 1024. If you leave it at 1024, your life is going to get annoying. For me, again, I've got 16 gigs of RAM on this MacBook Pro. I'm not really doing anything with this MacBook Pro other than doing demos, so I will just allocate 3 gigs of RAM to this particular instance just to make life easier for me, make sure I don't run into any bottlenecks. Then I'll hit continue. Then it'll ask about the virtual hard drive. Do not add, create, or use a different one. So we're going to create a virtual hard drive. Again, recommended size is 10 gigs. Nope, not for Ubuntu. What file type? We'll just leave it a VDI. Hit continue. Dynamically allocated. We'll leave that there. And then we'll go over here and I'll just notch that up to 30 gigs in size, especially because it's dynamically allocated. So the file, the virtual hard drive will grow in the size as it's required. So it will start small and then grow up. So instead of just giving it 25, I'll give it 30 because it will only use as much as it needs anyway. Then I'll go create. And then there we go. We got Ubuntu Desktop install demo. Now from here, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go to settings. Now in the settings, I will remind you for network, make sure with the network that you have network enabled. If you don't have this enabled, you're going to have problems, and attached to NAT. I've gotten a lot of complaints and questions in the past from previous videos I've done about VirtualBox where people are trying to set up a network or do something, and the reason that they can't connect to the internet or to the network is they've screwed up something here. So for these basic things that we're doing right now, we will leave this attached to NAT. We will deal with these other options in the future. But then we're going to go over to storage, and this is the important one. So storage, we actually need to connect that ISO file because, again, for some reason, user interface design, this is just a horrible user interface design for being able to boot off of an ISO file. So to boot off the ISO file, so we can actually install Ubuntu Desktop, we go here, you have controller, you're going to simply click onto empty. From empty, we're going to go all the way over to this weird little circular CD looking thing. We're going to click on that. Now, if you've already used ISOs in the past, you'll have, the recent ones here, but just to show you how this works, you're going to go choose a virtual optical disk file. So we've already downloaded that from that Ubuntu download page, and we have Ubuntu 18.0.3 desktop AMD 64 ISO. We simply double click that, and so that is now connected. So when we go through the boot process, it will then boot off of this ISO file, and we'll be able to install the operating system. Then we just click OK. Now everything's done, so we're all set up. Everything looks good, so I'm going to double click the Ubuntu Desktop install demo, and we're going to start this process. So this starts up, it's going through, and again, depending on how fast your particular computer is, how much RAM, everything else, that will depend on how fast this whole installation process goes. We get errors. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. They're just errors. Why are they there? I don't know. Do they matter? No, not really. It's kind of like the blue screen of death. I remember when I first was explained what the blue screen of death was supposed to be. Way back in the day with Windows, Microsoft came up with the blue screen of death as a way to give technicians an idea of what was going on with the operating system so that they could try to fix it. But the reality is it simply gave a whole bunch of information that nobody ever understood. And so the only thing that technicians did when they got the blue screen of death was reboot the computer, and that was it. So that's kind of like when you get those failures, that's kind of what's going on. So anyways, we get to this install page, so English or whatever the hell your language is. And then, okay, over here on the left, you see try Ubuntu, and over here on the right, you have install Ubuntu. So what the try Ubuntu is whenever you create an installation optical disk, so CD, DVD, to install Ubuntu, or a live USB, so if you have a flash drive, you're going to install off a flash drive, one of the things that you can do is you can actually have a live operating system. So you can actually boot an operating system directly off of that optical disk or that flash USB drive without writing anything to the hard drive. So literally, if all you want to do is just test Ubuntu, play around with it, see what it is, and not worry about formatting your hard drive or anything else, that's where you have the try Ubuntu. So if you're dealing with if you have a physical desktop, a physical laptop, you're playing around with Ubuntu on, you put in the optical disk, you might want to do try Ubuntu so that you can try it without actually messing with the hard drive in the computer. For us, we're dealing with a virtual machine, so we don't care about that. So we're going to go over here and we're actually going to install Ubuntu directly into the virtual machine. So we click on this, again, English, or whatever the hell it is that you want, and then we're going to click continue. Okay, now what we got is we got updates on other software. What apps would you like to install? To start with, normal or minimal. So minimal, again, maybe if you want like a really simple installation. So again, let's say you want to build an Ubuntu server, but you're nervous about the command line. You're like, oh, I'm not sure about file navigation just from the command line. You might do like a minimal installation just to give you the basics, just the basic graphical user interface to be able to get through the operating system without, LibreOffice. Again, you may not want productivity software or other things. So you might do the minimal installation. We'll just leave normal. Again, especially for a basic class like this, we'll just leave normal. Other options, download updates while installing Ubuntu. I would highly recommend you do this. Now, if you're just trying to throw up a server, throw up a computer really quickly, test a couple of things and then kill it, uncheck this because you don't really actually want to have to download all these updates unless you're going to be using the system. But what I will say is don't try to save time by not downloading the updates if you plan to use the system, because this will give all the current updates. A lot of times with any operating system, whether it's Linux or Windows, many times you're trying to troubleshoot a problem, like you're having a problem and you're trying to troubleshoot the problem, and the fact of the matter is that problem was fixed by an update. So you're sitting there spending 3 hours trying to troubleshoot this problem, where if you simply installed the latest update, the problem would go away. So that's there. But down here is an interesting thing, and this is where we start talking about things like open source. Again, I did a video saying, is Linux open source? I get a lot of crap for those kind of videos. Oh, Eli, this is a stupid video. But it's important to understand here. See, install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware and additional media formats. So the important thing to understand is a lot of things like device drivers. So when I talk about proprietary software, a lot of people shrug it off. I don't care about Flash. I don't care about Adobe PDF Reader. I don't care about that stupid stuff. Why the hell are you wasting my time talking about the difference between free and open source? The reason is because it's not always about Flash and Adobe PDF Reader or whatever else. Sometimes it's about things like device drivers. So in your environment, are you comfortable with proprietary non-open source device drivers, right? People really get on their high horse and they really start screaming about, I will only use open source. All the way up into their Wi-Fi card literally doesn't work because it needs a proprietary driver. So something to think about. Here, again, default, it is unchecked. Default, it is unchecked unless you have a reason. I would highly recommend that you check this, especially while you are learning. Once you've learned Linux, once you feel completely comfortable with Linux, and once you understand all the differences between open source and free open source and proprietary, then you can figure out whether or not you actually want to check this. But in the beginning, check that. Then we're going to continue. Okay, so then with this, we got, erase disk and install Ubuntu, encrypt the new Ubuntu installation for security, use LVM, do something else. So these are actually, the encrypt and the LVM can be valuable in certain situations, but to be frank, you're watching a video on how to install Ubuntu Desktop, so we're not going there yet. We'll talk about that in the future. If you don't know what this stuff is, don't worry about it. Just erase disk and install Ubuntu. Again, especially since we're using a virtual machine. Now, that's the thing, like with the LVM, there's some interesting stuff you can do with LVM and storage. If you're dealing with physical hard drives, that might be useful, but since we're using a virtual machine, virtual hard drives, I would just say erase disk and install Ubuntu. Don't worry about the rest of it. Click install now. Okay, if you continue, blah, 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 do you really want to do this? Gives you a whole bunch of information you probably don't understand. It doesn't really matter. All you got to do is hit continue. Where are you? So we're going to say New York. Not really in New York, but close enough. Close enough for this. Your name. So what is your name? We're going to do Bob. Your computer's name. So again, in VirtualBox, I have this name over here, but this is just so that's just a user-friendly thing when I'm dealing with VirtualBox. This, your computer's name, this is the actual host name. What is the name of this computer going to be? It auto-fills in Bob-VirtualBox. Fine, whatever. You can put in whatever you want here. Choose a password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Fair password. Oh, that makes you worried. That makes you worried. It literally is calling 12345 6 a fair password. That's not good. Then one of the interesting things here is log in automatically or require my password to log in. Now, obviously, if this is a production system, this is going to be used in the real world. You want to require my password to log in. Again, security. But again, think about this. If you're just using this as a little test computer, you're playing around, just clicking that login automatically, that's not a bad thing. Again, remember, all options, have their place. In the real world, you would always want to log in. But again, in a test environment and a lab environment, just clicking that to log in automatically might make a lot of sense, so you don't have to worry about logging in while you're doing reboots and all that. I will leave it at require my password to log in, just so I can show you what the process is, and then we'll click continue. Now it's going to go through the installing process, again, depending on how fast your internet connection is, because we checked that option that said download new updates. So if you have a slow internet connection, this could take a long time. So depending on how fast your internet connection is, depending on how fast your computer is, and depending on how many resources you actually gave your virtual machine, that will say how long this whole process will take. I think when I was doing this before, I did this a couple of times just to make sure before I did this class. This process here usually takes me probably about 4 or 5 minutes. So with you, it'll vary. So the installation process has completed. So all we do now is we click on Restart Now. And this will now restart our nice little Ubuntu Desktop operating system. Please remove installation. Then we'll just go through, gives us some errors. And then it'll boot up in a second, and we will be able to log in, and we'll have a full-fledged GUI operating system. Booting up. See, we have my nice little pointer here. So you see we got Ubuntu, we got Bob. So I can click on Bob, I can plug in my password, 12345 6. I can do sign in. Takes a couple of seconds. Yeah, the fun of running this stuff in a virtual machine. It does take an extra couple of seconds. And there we go. Look at that. We got a pretty little Ubuntu desktop thing going on. What's new in Ubuntu, next, live patch, we won't deal with that. Next, help improve, whatever, next. We won't do that. Hit done. And there we go. So this is the Ubuntu desktop operating system. We have the desktop environment here. You got the graphical stuff going on. So you click on things such as Firefox. So you click on Firefox. First time you start it up, it takes a couple of seconds. Of course, that's how it always works with these kinds of things. So it comes up. You can see here we got the Firefox privacy policy. We at Mozilla, we believe, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I can click on the new tab. Again, this has the stuff for Firefox. I can go to CNN.com. It's kind of funny. When I used to use CNN.com as an example, it wasn't controversial. 10 years ago, CNN.com was not a controversial thing to use as an example for websites. Again, first time this thing boots up, it'll take a while as it starts doing all the things. And we can see, Dow tumbles on recession warning, trade war, proof Obama, blah, blah, blah. So we actually have, so this is the web browser within the desktop, within VirtualBox on the Mac. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice here is that the screen is very small. So if you're trying to do something on this screen, it may be a little bit difficult. If we go up here, we click on this little arrow thing. What what we can do is we can go to settings. So if we go to settings here, this brings up settings. We got Wi-Fi, notifications, Bluetooth, all kinds of things here. So we're going to go down to devices. So go to devices. And then when we click on devices, the first thing that's going to be shown is displays. Now, if you go and look, though, it looks like this page is cut off. So basically, the screen resolution that we have is so small, this page is cut off. So one of the things we can do is we can go up here, and if you kind of grab, you can then move around this window. And then once you move around this window, you can kind of shove it over a little bit so we can see what we're doing. And we can see the problem is the resolution is 800 by 600, which is way too small for what we're going to be dealing with. So we can simply click on this and we can decide what display resolution we want, 1280 by 960, 1280 by 1024, so on and so forth. I don't know, just to be the 1280 by 1024, I click on that, and then I click apply. Then I do keep changes, and okay, so now I actually have a resolution and a screen size that I can deal with. So if you install Ubuntu and you have that really small screen resolution, all you have to do is you go to settings. So you go up here to this little arrow, you click on the setting thing, that brings you here. You scroll down to devices, it brings you here to display, then you go to resolution, then you change your resolution, then you have to get here to the apply button. So again, if you can't see the apply button, that's where you have to grab the window and you have to move around. Once you've done that, you have the size, and then you can start interacting how you want. You will get the software updater. So with this, if you want to, you can install now, you can remind me later, or if you want to click on settings, this will give you, the normal options, Windows or Mac or whatever have, automatically check for updates, what do you want to do with them, so on and so forth. So with that's the basics. Right now you have a full GUI Linux operating system installed within VirtualBox, and so you can start playing with it. So now you have a distribution of Linux installed within VirtualBox that's relatively easy to play with. You can right click, you can left click, you can double click, you can change settings, you can futz with all kinds of different things. You are using Linux. This is Linux. It is Linux, but it has a nice graphical user interface that even a 10-year-old can use. So now you can get comfortable with Linux so that when you get to the point that you're going to be interacting with the command line, it doesn't seem so daunting. Again, one of the big problems that I see with technicians trying to get into Linux or anything else is frankly their brain just kind of shuts down. Their brain, it's like their brain can't really grasp what it is that they're looking at when they see that little blinking cursor of the command line. They're like, oh no, if this is what Linux is, I can't do it. Maybe I should just go off and be a florist. So one of the nice things here is you can go into graphical user environment. You're dealing with Linux. This is Linux. You can go to terminal. You can do all the command line commands and all that kind of stuff. You can get comfortable with it so that then when you go to just the server operating system without a desktop environment and you've got a command line, you can think, okay, I understand this. I get what Linux is. I can figure this out. I just need to know what the commands are, and it just makes people feel a lot more comfortable. Starting with the GUI, playing around the GUI, and then going to the command line, I have found it makes it a lot easier for people. Think about it a lot like in the Windows Server world. So right, the Windows Server world, you've got that nice GUI. I don't know. I like the old GUI. But anyways, you got the GUI in the Windows Server world. Again, the same thing, right? Click, left click, all that kind of thing. And then when you want to start doing some more complicated things or when you want to start doing scripting, you then just drop into PowerShell. So the PowerShell is the command line for the Windows Server world, and it's the same type of thing. You go in, you deal with Active Directory in a graphical environment. You deal with files and folders in a graphical environment. Once you understand how all that works, then you simply can go to the PowerShell and go, okay, how do I do what I did in the graphical environment simply using commands? And then it's pretty easy because you can do it, right? I know I can do it because I did it. I just have to know what command to type in. Then you do the Google searches or whatever else. You type in the commands and yay, now you're a professional too. So anyways, I know a lot of people out there, a lot of the old timers in Linux or a lot of the Linux fans or whatever think things like the graphical user interface is just absolutely horrible. Real technicians don't use graphical user interfaces. Yeah. I, I don't know. If it makes you comfortable, if it makes you happy, if it makes things easier, use what works for you. So, anyways, so now you understand how to install Ubuntu Desktop. The big thing, especially in VirtualBox, is make sure you adjust the default settings. Again, give it at least 2 gigs of RAM. I would argue if you can, give it 3 gigs of RAM, give it enough storage space, all of those other things. Because again, with VirtualBox, their default settings at this point in time are way too low unless you're installing something just like a Linux server distribution. So make sure you adjust those things, know what you need to put in there. Again, with networking, depending on what kind of networking you're going to do, if you're simply going to try to go out to the internet, get updates, that type of thing, within VirtualBox, make sure you have it set to attach to NAT, Network Address Translation. If you're going to be doing other things, like you're going to have multiple virtual machines all trying to communicate with each other, do realize you have to change that attach to something else. We'll talk about that later, but those are some of the only quirks that you can run into. So with that, as always, I enjoyed doing this video and look forward to seeing you on the next one.